Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Parrot Analytics Live. My name is Samuel, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Parrot Analytics. To get started, I would like to extend a special welcome to all Parrot Analytics enterprise customers. Thank you all for making the time to be here with us today, especially those that are connecting from various time zones around the world. As we wait for the room to fill, please feel free to write in the chat if you like where you're joining from. It's always super interesting to see all the countries represented. And just remember, by default, chat is set to hosts and panelists. Make sure you set this to everyone before you send your message, as sometimes we get the same question asked twice. And just a couple of admin things before we get started. We have received all the questions that you have already submitted. Thank you. We'll address some of these at the end of the webinar, and you can submit any other questions you have throughout the webinar in the chat. Remember to select everyone when you submit your questions. And once we're done with the official session today, we'll answer as many additional questions as we have time for. And we will send out an email later on with today's presentation. On the call today, we are very happy to welcome Ken Belson. Ken Belson is a sports business reporter for the New York Times, a job that includes covering the NFL and its social, legal, medical, and financial challenges. He has interviewed commissioners, owners, athletes, and many others. He has covered Super Bowls, World Series, marathons, the Olympic Games, and for good measure, oral arguments in the Supreme Court. He has also worked in the metro section writing about transportation, economics, and energy, and in the business section where he covered media and telecommunication. Mr. Belson spent his first 3 years at the Times, starting in 2001 in Tokyo, where he covered business in Japan. Prior to the Times, he wrote for Bloomberg, Reuters, and Businessweek, all in Tokyo, where he lived for 12 years. In 2011, Mr. Belson returned to Japan to join a team that was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for its coverage of the tsunami and nuclear disaster in Fukushima. In 2017, he was part of another team that was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize for its reporting on the mass shooting in Las Vegas. Everyday Sunday, the story of the NFL's rise to prominence, is his second book. He is also the co-author of a book on Hello Kitty, Japan's answer to Mickey Mouse. Fantastic to have you here with us. And we also have Alejandro Rojas with us today, who is the Vice President of Applied Analytics here at Parrot Analytics, where he runs Parrot IQ Consulting, a unit that builds custom models and solutions from Parrot's proprietary data to help clients assess and predict the value of content-led strategies. Alejandro is a former McKinsey consultant who was also a TV executive producer. He earned his master's degree in information and data science from the University of California, Berkeley, his MBA from MIT Sloan School of Management, and his BSc from Duke University, and is a current member of the International Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. All right, so today's discussion is about how the NFL became one of the most powerful forces in US media, culture, and commerce, and what that can teach us about valuing sports today. Ken and Alejandro will unpack the structural, strategic, and global levers behind the NFL's ascendancy and how audience demand metrics can reshape how rights, sponsorship, and fandom are valued across the sports industry. There is a lot there to unpack. And I'm personally really looking forward to this conversation. And with that, over to you, Alejandro and Ken.
Yeah, well, it's Ken, always a pleasure to have time with you. I know you have like a very busy schedule, and like we appreciate that you make time to be with us today. I think we have a very kind of like, I think we wanted to structure the conversation from a perspective of like where we come from, which is more like the data world, and then connect that to like all the stories and everything that happened in the NFL that is somehow reflected in the data we collect. But obviously, you know, the specifics, the characters, like everything that happens. So like it's kind of interesting to see like how that data really shapes the narrative of what happened, right? So with that, I think first of all, like for those people who want to read the book, we're sharing here, like I believe you can like just buy it through this link, right? We can. This is like, okay, so So anybody who wants to kind of like take a look, I mean, the book I read it is like it reads really well. It's just like it's a fantastic story. I mean, it's like on many angles, right? Like the sport, the business, the characters. And I think this conversation today is going to highlight some of the key points. But obviously, there's so much richness in the book that I really recommend everybody to go out there and buy it. Um, I don't know if you want to say anything about the book before we jump in, Ken.
Sure. So I wrote about or have been writing about the NFL as a business for 12 years. So I think to Alejandro's point, there's a lot of high level conversation about how the NFL manages or has managed its businesses, including crises, how to deal with crises, and particularly how the evolution of its media contracts. But it's written from a lot of individual interviews with the key players, Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft, Commissioner Roger Goodell, previous people who worked at the NFL headquarters. And really, what you take away is that the NFL is very deliberate, very slow to move sometimes, but very careful. And they tend to not make mistakes because they take their time evaluating before they jump into a business silo, whether it's gambling or streaming, international, etc. So I'd say that's the broad takeaway from it. And hopefully it's a very readable sort of corporate history, if you want to call it that, over the last 25, 30 years. So thank you.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I think that summarizes very well how entertaining the book is because it has so many angles and you have so many stories. But let's just get right in. I think if you look at like the specifics of the NFL today and like if you look at the traditional metrics of success, usually has been ratings, right? TV ratings, even though obviously that's changing. But if you look at the TV ratings, I mean, it's incredible to see that out of the top 20 shows are out there. I mean, I think the vast majority of those, like we're talking like maybe 15 or 16 are really NFL games, right? So that's kind of where we are today, right? Like if you look at where the league is, I think the purpose of the talk today is also like to understand how they got here, but also understand a little bit like how do we think about like the future, right? And like the future is gonna go like maybe TV ratings are not gonna be like that relevant anymore. Like we're talking like everything's kind of moving into streaming, like the business is becoming more global. So I think there's gonna be a lot of changes in the next 10 years, let's say. And that's kind of where we kind of come in because at the end, Parrot has always been at the forefront of trying to understand how consumers express demand for content. Usually, like we started with TV, and then we moved into movies, and then we moved into talent, and now we just launched sports because obviously, when you think about like the ecosystem of the streaming industry, that's like the next frontier. That's like everybody wants to get sports in their catalog and in their programming because sports is such a like element to bring people in. And the way we measure things is very interesting because we actually capture all the different data points where people express demand for the sport. So think of this as like all of this stuff that you see on the screen are kind of data points that we capture to understand if there's demand for the league, for the team, for the athlete. And this is kind of like the natural way that people are kind of really interacting with all of these sports. And in the NFL in particular, like there's so many things that people do when they kind of like, to express the fandom for the sport itself. Um, so one of the things that we bring to the table, and I think is important from a kind of methodological perspective, is the fact that we see audiences as having like three different vectors in the case of sports. You may watch a game because maybe you love football and you're gonna watch a game no matter who's playing. So that's one sort of audience. You may watch a game because maybe you're like a Buffalo Bills fan, and that's like you're gonna watch all the single games that goes. Like you are like the biggest fan of these guys, and then that's another vector of audience. And then you may also watch a game because maybe you're like a Mahomes fan, right? Like so, like maybe you don't like the Kansas City Chiefs, but like you want to see how like the quarterback is doing. So that's another set of audiences. So at the end, it's like all of that obviously is combined into an aggregate set of audiences. But I think from an analysis perspective, is useful to understand where these audiences are coming from and why they're tuning in. And that's what our data kind of allows you to do. One thing that is kind of like talks about the prominence and the success that the league has had is just by looking at the metric of like media rights, right? So let me just kind of start with that. And then, Ken, I want to get your reaction to this because like, obviously you know a lot of the specifics of how they got here, but when you look at the first chart that I'm showing here, these are like the annual media rights that all of these leagues are getting. So this is how much they charge like the networks and all the different streamers or all the different distribution partners that they have. So in the case of the NFL, we're talking like it's over $12 billion a year that they get. Is a league that gets the most money for like these rights. If you think about that, it's almost double like the next league, which would be the NBA and so on. But I think one thing that is interesting, right, is like when you take this data, which is actual transaction money, and you compare that to our metric, which is really unrelated because of what we measure is like how consumers express demand for sport, including the teams. So in the chart on the right, what we're comparing on the vertical axis is the actual transaction values of the media rights. But on the horizontal axis, what we have is the actual demand metric that we capture. And that's like year to date. So we did this just like as a quick analysis so to show that at the end of the day, you know, all of these media rights, there's a reason why, you know, like kind of like it's falling like that, right? Like that they're charging, that the NFL is getting the most money, and there's a reason for like all these like media rights are being allocated to the different sports, because at the end, the horizontal axis really measures like the kind of like audience engagement that you're generating. And obviously in the NFL is the one that generates the most when you include not only the team, but also the league's demand. So I'm curious to know like, how did they get here? Like, Ken, like you know the specifics. So this is what we see today, but like, you know, like what happened to get here?
So the NFL, going back to the early 1960s, was the first league to decide to pool their media rights, their national games. Prior to the 1961, the teams would get and the home team would get the primary fee from the network. And Pete Rozelle, who was the new commissioner back then, looked at what the AFL was doing. The AFL was this sort of brand new league, and they started with pooling their revenue and splitting it evenly amongst the 8 teams. And so the NFL basically copied the AFL. They got an antitrust exemption from Washington, from the government, to allow them to basically negotiate one big TV deal and then split that money divided by, at that time, I think there were 14 teams. And that was really the beginning of their revenue sharing, if you want to call it that. TV was still a small amount compared to ticket sales and other things, but it started to grow. So that was the first thing. The second thing that's sort of critical is they stuck with the over-the-air model well into the 80s and the 90s, when other leagues started to veer off into cable and regional sports networks. The NFL has stood by this, reach, the over-the-air channel, CBS, ABC, Fox, etc., even when other teams and leagues were going individually and trying to divvy up local revenue. And so this has actually turned out to be a great strategy for the NFL because, as your previous chart showed, they have the biggest reach, the biggest audiences, and of course the cable subscription world is collapsing. And so now you see NBA teams and NHL teams starting to go back over the air with streaming as a complement. So the NFL's sort of conservative approach and traditional approach has ended up paying dividends in a way that the other leagues can't compete with.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's very interesting. Also, the other thing that I think is interesting from this chart is the fact that if you see at the location of the NFL, right, like that blue point that you see in there is actually above the line of like the regression line that is there. So it really means like even at that at that positioning, they're getting even more money than like they're supposed to get, right? And it seems like that reflects the fact that it's for like the other side of the coin, like right, like the partner who's actually paying for the rights is going to be hard to make money, right? Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, essentially they're overpaying, and
Mm.
that's a couple of things. Historically, in 1993, Fox Sports, Rupert Murdoch wanted to get into football because he was creating or was trying to create a national footprint for Fox. And at that point, it was not a well-received or widely distributed TV network. It had The Simpsons and In Loving Color, but it was hard to find in many markets. He outbid CBS by $100 million a year for 4 years. This is 1994. And it taught everybody a lesson. The NFL, until that time, had three bidders for three packages. And Jerry Jones, one of the reasons he's in the book, focus of the book, is Jerry Jones said, "Why aren't we running an auction? Why don't we have a fourth bidder for the three packages?" And he brought in Rupert Murdoch. And suddenly they overpaid just to get market share. And what happened was the other leagues saw this. NBA, David Stern, Major League Baseball, they all saw what happened with the NFL, that they were able to run an auction and get even more money. And so the leagues all quickly followed this model, the other leagues, and the networks also realized we can't do without sports. And so CBS learned a hard lesson. They were out of the NFL for 4 years, and all of that shoulder programming, 60 Minutes and Murder She Wrote, and wasn't getting any of the publicity. They lost that demographic, they lost affiliates, and so suddenly you had to have sports, and particularly the NFL. And essentially, the NFL created the demand that they need. The leverage changed from the networks to the teams or to the leagues at that point. So that goes back 30 years, and it's pretty much still the same.
Yeah, so and even at this moment in time, it's hard for like anybody to make money, right? Is that right?
Well, it depends on the network and it depends on the year. So the
Mm.
networks that host the Super Bowl, and it's on a rotating basis. Last
Yeah.
year was CBS, I believe it's NBC this year. They tend to make money because the $7 million for a 30-second ad, you're going to make
Mm.
back a lot. There's also a mixture of teams. CBS was left out for 4 years, and then they paid double for the AFC package, and they got lucky because the AFC they got coverage of the AC just as Tom Brady and the Patriots were kicking
Mm.
off. So they often had the best games on Sunday on CBS. Well, that changes, from time to time. Obviously, the Patriots are not as dominant, so it kind of depends on the mix of schedules and
Mm.
so forth. But look, the NFL still generates the advertising dollars, and the leagues can't afford to do without it. So yeah, but I'd say the Super Bowl is the big sort of wild card from year to year for the networks.
Interesting. We're gonna talk about the Super Bowl like as we keep advancing on this presentation. Uh, I think moving on, the other thing that we wanted to explore is like more like from an industry structure, right? Like when you look at the value of the teams, right? We also see the NFL as being a little bit different than some of the other leagues, right? Like if you look at the NBA, for example, like the league and the teams that have the most demand are the teams that are worth the most, right? So the LA Lakers have the most demand, they're worth the most based on like recent transactions. When you look at the Premier League, kind of the same story. Like Manchester United is the team that has the most demand and is a team that also is worth the most based on recent transactions. When we look at the NFL teams, the first thing that you see is a couple of things. One is like the value of all of these teams is above like most. I mean, like on average, is by far like they're more valuable than any of the other teams that we see in the other leagues. So it's like really high value. But then the other thing that is, I think, is like the most interesting thing about it is like it seems like in this case, demand is not like a big differentiator in terms of value, and not as much as you can see in some of the other ones. And I'm curious to know why that's the case. I mean, yeah, it probably has to do something with the structure, or how like the NFL is organized. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that, Ken.
Yeah, well, it goes back partly to the media rights and the percentage of the NFL's revenue that comes from national media rights is about 50% of revenue. Another 10, 12% comes from national sponsorships like Verizon, PepsiCo, and so forth. Um, uh, and so basically 2/3 of league revenue is shared equally amongst the 32 teams. In Major League Baseball, it's about 25%, which means that all teams will share the 25%, the national TV deals mostly. But then every other team is struggling to sell tickets and suites and parking and beer and wine and whatever else, and sell signage in their stadiums. And of course, New York and Los Angeles and Chicago are going to be the big teams because they have the biggest markets, they have the biggest local TV audiences, and they have the most corporate clients. The NFL, 2/3 of the money is by the time you turn on the lights at the beginning of the season, you're already in profitability. So no other league can match that in terms of shared revenue, and that's because they've stuck with those over-the-air contracts for so long, and they really have no local media to speak of. They have some shoulder programming, but really no, you can't broadcast games locally. It's all done nationally. So that kind of I sort of joke in the book, it's that kind of brand of socialism is actually working very well. And so, as your chart shows, there really isn't a huge gap between the highest and the lowest teams. They all sort of are profitable from day one.
Yeah, so it's kind of like once you're an owner, you're an owner of a team, you're kind of become like part of a club that like basically, I think you call it like the billionaires cafeteria or something, where like they all go there or something. So it's almost like you buy an entry ticket that basically gives you money no matter what you do, in a
Yeah,
way, right?
one owner told me the other day, he said when he bought the team, he looked at it like buying treasury bonds, like stable growth, you know, don't really go down. They don't plunge in value. They just keep growing and they're steady. And that's the way he viewed the NFL as an investment. It's actually been much faster than that. In some ways, it's like a NASDAQ stock. But in other words, it's stable and there's a floor under it and it's going to continue to grow over time. So that's the way smart people are looking at it. Is it's a good, assuming you can afford to get in. It's as predictable as in sports as you get.
Yeah, and it's almost like I think you mentioned in the book something about like being like a 747 flying on like autopilot, right? So you don't really have to do anything and you make money.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, now the late owner. He said, "Yeah, it's like flying a 747 on autopilot." So,
interesting. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the characters who like kind of are behind this success, I think, right? So the first one that comes to mind, and like you talked extensively about him in the book, and you actually already mentioned it, is Jerry Jones, and like he comes through as a really like a salesman, right? Like this guy is like putting like cowboy brand on everything, and like when we see like this chart in particular, what I think got my attention was the fact that like you have Jerry Jones as a celebrity and as like the purple line, but then you have like all these other elements where like he either has a cameo or he's present. Obviously, you have the Dallas Cowboys, which is the green, like you can measure the demand for that. And then you can measure the demand of a specific content, like Landman, where like he made a cameo appearance. And then the most recent show that he released is part of like he's part of that show, which is America's Team. He's the gambler and his Cowboys, which was released in, I believe it was like late August, and that's the blue line that you see in there. Each of these stuff at the end obviously generates demand, but it seems like all of this demand basically goes back to putting like a light on Jerry Jones, and he's the one that really captures and capitalizes on everything that is happening, and that's why the purple line is always higher than some of this stuff. Like, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think this chart kind of tells us a little bit of who this guy is, right?
yeah, well, Jerry in some ways has a Texas-sized ego. He wants to be in the spotlight. He is the face of the team to the point where he overshadows coaches and sometimes the players. Jerry learned this very early on. First of all, as you said, he really is a salesman. There's a funny quote in the book from Robert Kraft describing Jerry Jones. He said he could charm a dog off of a meat truck. He could somehow tell a dog to stop eating a steak and sell him something else. He is a salesman, but he learned early on that even when the team is bad, he can still be in the news by just being accessible. He has a radio show on Tuesdays. He is the only owner in the NFL and probably in most pro sports to speak to the media individually after every game, win or lose. And so journalists love Jerry because you can always get to Jerry. He'll talk, he'll have a smile, he'll tell you what's on his mind. Sometimes it makes no sense, but accessibility means a lot, especially in this world of kind of walled off privacy that a lot of wealthy people exist in. That's not Jerry. He's really the last of that breed of owners who are salesmen. Robert Kraft was that more in the olden days. He's a little less accessible than he used to be, but again, he felt like he had to be the voice of the team because Bill Belichick, the coach, didn't want to talk. Tom
Yeah,
Brady
yeah,
stayed in his
yeah,
lane.
like this is like talking about that we have like that was actually like like I wanted to maybe expand on like how Robert Kraft has been the owner of the Patriots, like basically managed to put together like a specific team that basically changed the franchise, right? Like, and how he did that, I'm curious to kind of know more about that.
Sure. Well, he took over the team in 1994, and there was a very good coach,
Mm,
Bill Parcells, but
mm,
he left after a couple of years, and they had two more coaches. But when he got Belichick to come in, Belichick has a degree in economics, and his real value, at least Robert Kraft thought, was that he would be able to understand the value of players under
mm,
this new system, the salary cap system, and that turned out to be true. And then he got, if you will, lucky. He drafted Tom Brady, who was an unknown, and there was an injury, and Tom Brady took over. So there was both some forethought on Robert Kraft's part to get the right type of coach, but then also got lucky with timing and having this quarterback
mm,
that turned out to have an extraordinary ability. So really, the three of them together were an interesting mix. They're all three of them very different, and they somehow coexisted, but it wore out after a while. But frankly, they are
mm.
the unicorn. They are the one team in the last 30 years to really have a football dynasty, and it's incredibly hard thing to do. The way that revenue
Mm,
sharing works. I mean, the flip side of revenue sharing and 66% of the money shared is there's parity. There are
mm,
any given year, there can be a team that comes out of nowhere, like Cincinnati a couple of years ago. They go to the Super Bowl, and that has generated more fan interest because it's not the same teams every year, year after year.
right. That's very interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to also maybe tell us a little bit about Roger Goodell, because I think he was like a very important piece of like how everything kind of happened. One thing that I was surprised about in the book is also like how early on, I think back in 2010, he set a target that the league was going to generate more than $25 billion a year, which seemed like very aggressive at the time. I think it was like three times what the league was making, and like he made it happen. So like, I mean, it's like one of those few times that you see like an aggressive forecast that actually happens. So I'm curious to know more about like the character and how that's been able to kind of drive the league into the place where it is right now.
Sure. Well, Roger Goodell has worked his entire professional career at the NFL. He's very well known to the owners. He's helped the owners with problems over the years. He's been involved in labor negotiations and media negotiations. So there's nobody that has the same resume as Roger Goodell. He also, as the slide shows, he's a senator's son. He grew up in a political family, so he's a good sort of diplomat for the league in the sense that he knows how to negotiate and use leverage. He's very good. There's a TV executive quoted in the book who said that darn Goodell, he knows he has the power and he's using the power in negotiations with the networks. But it's interesting. The structure of the league is very, the owners are very powerful. And there's this idea that Goodell is like a CEO and his title is commissioner. And it's true that he speaks to the media as the head of the NFL, but in reality, he's more like a Senate majority leader. He's always trying to figure out where is the power amongst the owners. The owners are the ones that ultimately decide whether to play more games overseas or to get into a new gambling arrangement or to sell an NFL network to ESPN. And you need 24 votes, you need 75% to pass any big changes. And so, really, he's more like a political leader who's trying to gather the people in his party to vote one way, as opposed to him leading that. It's a very different approach than you see in the NFL, or sorry, in the NBA or Major League Baseball, where the commissioner has more power to kind of lead the league. Roger is more the leader at the behest of the owners.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. And I guess he's also like, if you look at the chart, he may have some picks because he has to do some like prices or like some major announcements. But other than that, he's kind of working behind the scenes, right? A little bit, right? Is that kind of fair
Yeah,
to
and I
say?
think he prefers it that way. He does
Right.
delegate. He has pretty good, executive team. He doesn't really do a lot of interviews anymore. If it's about something he wants to say, like international or the
Hmm.
draft, or something like he'll be out front. But
Hmm.
he kind of prefers to stay out of the spotlight if he can. I've interviewed him over the years, but he's become more and more reluctant to just sit down with reporters and talk. He's much more business focused now than he was even 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Interesting. Very interesting. And talking about the business focus of the league, I think one thing that really got my attention in the book, and I thought it was like a super interesting story, was the whole notion of how they engineer the the growth of the league itself, right? So they, and I think you speak to somebody who's like an expert in there, that they summarize this as like, hey, you have to use the rules to create the sort of game that you want, because that's what's going to generate basically interest. So I'm curious for you to kind of talk to us a little bit more about that conversation that you had. Obviously, in this chart, what we were trying to show was that, like if you start like winning, like if you have a winning season, like the demand grows with that. And that's what we're seeing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But I think apart from winning, for the league itself, when you're thinking about the league, how do you win is more about like how do you grow your audiences, right? And then like what are the levers that you can use to kind of do that? So first for you to kind of expand on that, because I think it's a super interesting story.
Sure. Most of the book, the majority of the book is about the business of the league, but I did take one chapter and write about the game itself and how it changed over the years. And in the early years of the league in the 1920s and 30s, really into the 40s, the game was very much like the college game. It was much more running focused, not a lot of scoring. And over the years, they developed this strategy, a couple of the sort of key advisors to the league, that you need more plays. And the way to do that is to pass the ball more, because passing takes less time than running. And so they came up with this 4 Ps sort of strategy, if you want to call it that: the number of plays, the number of passes, and the number of penalties eventually equals the number of points. And over time, in the early years, there was somewhere in the order of 22 to 23 points a game combined. And it gradually grew. World War II, 1950s, 1960s, it accelerated. It slowed in the 1970s. There were famous defensive struggles at that point. And in the 1980s, they changed the rules very actively to promote passing and scoring. And you see the San Francisco 49ers became very popular at that time with something called the West Coast offense. And it really spread that passing generates interest. Dan Marino on the Dolphins was a great quarterback then. And so the sweet spot for the NFL is about 44 points combined per game. So,
Mm.
24-21 or 24-20 or a score like that. That's kind of their average. Of course, you get some games above and below, but 44 historically 44 points a game is their sweet spot. And
Right.
so you'll constantly see them every season change the rules a little bit, partly for safety, which is understandable, like the kickoff rule, but partly to just make the game more exciting. And this has become even more important in a world where many fans are playing fantasy football and now, of course, gambling. Scoring is what gets people excited. And, that action, that dopamine hit you get from watching scoring. And frankly, in-game betting now is reliant on scoring. So that's kind of their sweet spot. And I don't say they specifically engineer it to get it to 44, but historically, the popularity of the game has risen when it's around 44 points a game.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And talking about you bring up the whole gambling thing, and I think one of the chapters, and I want to kind of touch on that. You talk about like when the Super Bowl goes to Las Vegas, which was in 24, and like how that's kind of like the pinnacle of like bringing also gambling into the whole equation. So I want you to maybe spend a little bit of time on like kind of like a little bit like reconnecting with that moment, right? Like the 2024 Super Bowl, what was happening. I think in here we're capturing some of the stars that they kind of connect to the people. So I think they're very good at converting this event into like a really mega cultural event. And that's when like the Taylor Swifts kind of like have a role to play, but also other people like John Cena or like Gronk or like, how do they kind of match all that so that at the end of the day you're able to really attract like a massive audience, right? So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the Super Bowl started in 1967, excuse me, as a product of the merger between the AFL and the NFL. And part of that merger was we want to play a championship game between the two leagues. And Pete Rozelle, we talked about him just briefly, the former commissioner. The idea very early on was to create an event in a neutral city. So you watch the World Series is going to start. The games are going to be in Los Angeles or Toronto because those are the two teams. Well, that's how the NFL used to be. And so they decided, let's put the game, let's decide where it is 1 year in advance or 2 years or whatever, pick that city, and let's make it in a warm weather climate. And so it was a very clever strategy because sponsors wanted to come to the game. General Motors, Kellogg, whatever the company that was working with the NFL, because they can take their clients to Miami or Los Angeles or New Orleans during the winter. And so it turned it into kind of a vacation within a business trip. And so that was very clever. Plus, on television, it just looked great to be playing in a warm city. So that was a very interesting choice they made. And the predictability of the location led to all sorts of other things. The networks started to sell ads around it. Sponsors started to sponsor traveling fans going, hey, I know the game will be in San Francisco next year. Let's make plans. It didn't matter what the teams were. And you wouldn't know those teams until 2 weeks before. So it turned it into like a holiday because every year people could say, I want to go. It's my bucket list. I know where it's going to be. I don't care who plays. And that made the Super Bowl special from a very almost instantly it became a hit. There was only the first Super Bowl did not sell out. After that, every Super Bowl is sold out. Tickets go for $5, $6, $7,000 now, and all the high rollers, the influencers, the entertainers want to play the Super Bowl halftime show. It was a very interesting strategy. It broke the mold, and it's frankly the only professional league that really does this, where it's a holiday essentially now to play wherever the Super Bowl is.
Yeah, super interesting. I also want to talk a little bit about like maybe like what's next, right? Like when you think about like the strategies that they're pursuing, obviously the international markets is kind of where like they're putting their sights on. So for that, I wanted to kind of share what our data is revealing in terms of what is the market availability of the NFL as a league. for us, the way we measure travelability essentially captures like the level of demand that any country has on a per capita basis relative to the country of origin. So like if we think about like the typical American as being like 100% into the NFL, how does it look like across all these different countries? So I'm curious to see, like if you look at this chart, does this make sense to you? Like, how do you explain like some of these countries? Like, maybe talk to us a little bit about that because it seems to me that's like the next phase for the NFL, right?
Yeah, well, obviously Canada based on proximity and language, and also the Canadian Football League is a variation on NFL football. So it makes sense that they would be the second most, I guess, popular market. Germany is an interesting case because after World War II, the U.S. Army occupied Western Germany, and the Army soldiers based there were playing football and taught the Germans to play football as well. And so there's actually a pretty vibrant semi-pro football league or leagues actually in Germany, and the reception there has been fantastic. When they this year they're going to have a game in Berlin. They've had games in Munich and Frankfurt. I've been over to Germany to speak with fans there. They're very knowledgeable about it. I would say the real limitation is the time zones. Sunday night the games are on at 7 o'clock at night, which is great. But the second games at in the afternoon and then the evening, it's just too late for German fans to
Mm,
watch. But there's a very avid following in Germany. Britain, partly again because of the U.S. military and the relationship between the two countries, but also because the NFL has invested a lot in playing games in London. It's become very familiar now to many fans who have attended. Even my British fans, friends who go, they love the American sort of entertainment value you get that you don't get at a Premier League game. So there is a sort of still an attraction to it. It's not widely played, but there's a familiarity there. And then Mexico too. We skip over Australia. Australia, Aussie rules football. There are
mm,
there are punters in the NFL who come from Australia. So there's a lot of connection there in the sports pages. And then Mexico, especially, is played in Mexico, not as widely, but still. And there are teams that have big followings, the Cowboys, the Steelers, the San Francisco 49ers, because of their proximity and Hispanic fans in America as well. So those top tier teams, there's a lot of
mm.
value there for the NFL. As you get down the list, Austria, I think just because of its proximity to Germany, and Ireland, especially a lot of cultural ties between the two nations. New Zealand, we were scratching our heads earlier. I don't know whether it's the rugby culture or the familiarity of American culture in New Zealand. And then you really start to tail off there. There is interest in elsewhere in Western Europe, but the game just isn't played there in any substantial way. So it's going to be longer for the NFL to break into these markets in a big way.
Yeah, and then let's just to finalize. I also wanted you to have your reaction in terms of when we measure like the global demand of teams. So think of this as like what is the demand of the different teams globally. We have a list that basically has a very particular order, which I'm curious to maybe have your reaction on that.
Sure. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs have been in what, five Super Bowls
Uh,
in the last 6 or 7 years. So,
yeah,
if you're a new fan, you're going to follow the successful teams, and they have a great transcendent star in Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. They have good personalities. They have popular colors and designs. But also, the Chiefs have spent a lot of time and money investing in overseas markets, particularly Germany and Mexico. The owner, Clark Hunt, he has a soccer team, and that soccer team has a long-standing relationship with Bayern Munich. So he has been dealing with German sports officials for many years. And so they have invested, they've tried to be very consciously the NFL's quote unquote world team. The team president, Mark Donovan, told me, it's in the book, but he said that they now have 1.5 million euros in sponsorship revenue. But he also said they're spending 3 million euros in marketing. So it's not profitable yet, but it's clear there's interest in these brands. I'll just quickly go through. Packers is also a great brand, one of the most popular NFL teams. They've been very successful over the years. Cowboys, we discussed, they're also very popular in with the Hispanic cultures, particularly in Mexico. Eagles were just the Super Bowl champs, and so on and so forth. Steelers traditionally have been a very popular team as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's so much to kind of like understand about the league. So what I want to end is like going back to your book. I guess I think I want to invite people to really download it, and I mean, this is I guess you can kind of go there and buy it. It's a wonderful book. But with that, maybe we open up for questions. Samuel, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is a purchase, not a download. We are trying to sell the book, Ale.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there have been a
true.
couple of questions submitted ahead of the webinar. I just got one just now, which is specific to Australia. So someone wants to know why the popular teams perform poorly in Australia. I thought next year was the first NFL game in Melbourne. Have there been previous games you can reference?
Yeah.
Kind of to
Sure. Next year, the Los Angeles Rams will travel to Melbourne for the first regular season game. There might have been one or two exhibition games in previous years, I think back in the early 2000s. It's as you know, as geography dictates, it's a long way to go. What the NFL did in 2023, so prior to for starting in 2007, the league itself was orchestrating the international strategy. And in, forgive me, 2021, they said, fans don't root for the NFL. They root for individual teams and they root for individual players. And so what they did was they gave every team the chance to pick territories and marketing areas. And Los Angeles Rams, because they're in the Pacific Rim, have chosen Japan and Australia in particular to market their team. They send NFL players to these markets to meet fans. They have clinics, flag football clinics, and so forth. And eventually they hope there will be marketing opportunities and sponsorships that come from this. So that's really why you're going to see the Rams and another visiting team coming up in about 1 year from now. And that's why Kansas City is focused on Germany because of its longstanding relationship with Bayern Munich.
Mm.
The Steelers family, the Rooney family, which owns the Steelers, came from Ireland. Their big market is Ireland. They just played a game in Dublin. So each team has its own little carve out for their interest area, business interests. And as a consequence, the fans in Australia are going to see a lot more Los Angeles Rams merchandise and things like that in the coming months.
Very good. So I'll pin my note. If you like, you can tackle one of the earlier questions that was submitted ahead of the webinar. We also had a really some practical input from one of our viewers here that the point being made is that the NFL made a major push to bring flag football to the Olympics as a sport for both males and females. Many observers believe this version of the sport will catch on internationally simply because the cost of equipment for youth are too high for many countries. And then you contrast that with things like soccer and basketball. These things are popular simply because you just need a ball and then you're off. So that's quite an interesting thought as well, right?
Yeah, very much. I mean, look, the NFL has a big challenge. The game is not widely played outside of North America. As I said, there's a league in Germany, there's a corporate league in Japan, but it's really very minuscule. Gets almost no media attention. So they have to teach fans how the game is played for them to appreciate how to watch it and how to maybe buy a ticket to see a game. And the way they're doing that is with flag. And as Karen mentioned here in the chat, it's very cheap. You just need a couple of flags on your belt, a couple of cones, and then a ball. And away you go. You can teach how to pass, how to catch, the strategy of running a route without the physical collisions that you see with
Mm.
full contact sport. And as you pointed out, also that women can get involved, which also spreads the popularity of it. And the NFL, as you said, also successfully lobbied to get the flag football in the Olympics in 3 years in Los Angeles. So yeah, it's a very deliberate strategy. It's inexpensive. Most of the NFL teams have or are supporting flag leagues in different countries. I would bet that the Los Angeles Rams are sponsoring flag football in Australia. I know that the Steelers are sponsoring flag football in Ireland. So they're branding it as as an NFL initiative or co-branding it between the team and the league in these various markets.
Excellent. Alejandro, did you want to tackle? All right, suddenly all the questions are coming
Yeah.
in. There's another
I
one
think
that
before those questions, I think we got questions regarding like how like
yeah.
sports demand maybe apply to other teams and like other leagues. So that's something that we can do not only for the NFL, obviously we can do for other leagues. I think what's interesting is our approach always like is the same in terms of trying to capture what is the league demand, but also the teams and also the athletes. I think at the end, like that's kind of gives you a perspective that is quite comprehensive. And then like regarding like I think we got a question regarding like how to like maybe start rolling the ball if you have like a a league that's still kind of in the making. And I think like every story is a little bit different, right? Like I think you have to leverage the technologies that you have at your disposal and find the right moment. I think the big lesson that I take from Ken's book is like how like the NFL was very deliberate in terms of how to negotiate these media deals. And I think that was kind of like a game changing, event for them in terms of where it took like the NFL to be like the prominent sport in America. But I think every league or every sport has to find like what is the right ingredient or recipe to get there. I don't think you can kind of replicate the model, right? I don't know, like can maybe you have a take on that?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I think the NFL, there's a section at the end of the book where Brian Rolap, the former head of media, was explaining their strategy in negotiations. The NFL starts by talking to all the participants, whether they're broadcast network or Amazon or Netflix. They basically say, look, here's the basic schedule, not the individual teams, but here's where we're going to have games. We're going to have a Christmas game, a Black Friday game. We're going to have 5 international games, etc. Why don't you tell us what you think is interesting? What do you want to do? In other words, I don't think the NFL wants to bid against itself. And so it's always soliciting ideas from the various networks on what else can they do. So I'll give you one example. CBS was owned by Paramount, and Paramount owned Nickelodeon, which is for kids. And so they had a alternative broadcast for kids of the same NFL game, but they called it the Slime Game because it had the various characters from Nickelodeon, and so it was popular with kids. It didn't. It was a CBS idea. So there's the Manning cast where they have Eli and Peyton Manning talking on ESPN on a separate channel, watching the same game. So it gives fans a different way to watch based on their tastes. And so the NFL's been listening to the networks to try and get them to be more creative with what is now a very familiar, broadcast package.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that I also want to touch on, like that I kind of are referencing the same thing. Like one is like how do we measure performance in a team where like in a country where like the league is not present, like Australia. So I think that's the power of demand as we measure it, because like we really come to the fans and we see how they express demand for this. It doesn't have to be necessarily air and like nationally. It's the fact that you're like searching for it. Maybe you're like consuming videos, or maybe you're talking about it, maybe you're visiting the Wikipedia pages. So all of these are like data inputs that allows us to kind of compare what is the relative demand that the league and the teams and the athletes have in a specific markets, even though those markets may only have like a game, or maybe they don't even have a game. So like I think that's one element. The other thing is like a question related to that is more like how do we figure out what is the right value of the media rights? And I think it comes back to that initial chart that we presented, where like you can actually see that at the end, like the metric of demand kind of tells you what is the sort of like audience that you have. So it becomes a proxy of like the total addressable market that the sport may have, and then based on that, you can use it as a reference to determine like what is the right value for your media rights, right? So a couple of those, I think that those two questions are kind of related in a way.
Indira
All
here
right.
asked about streaming. How are we doing, Sam? Are we
Yep.
okay on time?
I think we're almost on time. Maybe we'll take this as the last question for those that can't see it. Whether streamers and broadcasters are shifting more of their budgets to sports rights I suppose, instead of funding other genres, and how that trend has changed recently and impacted potentially on non-sports programming.
This is an industry question. I generally stick to the NFL, but look, the networks, their money is not limitless. And so they do have to make choices. Or like NBC just returned to cover the NBA this year. Well, that means they probably don't have all that much money for other sports. They would give up hockey, let's say. But I will say the bidders for the NFL, the big networks, CBS, Fox, ESPN, and so forth, they all want to be in the NFL. They all start with, we need the NFL, and then what else does our package look like? Are you going to get NASCAR one year, or golf, or F1? All these different, they're balancing. MLS soccer, which used to be on NBC, they dropped it. Well, now it's on Apple. But everybody wants a piece of the NFL. It is the most valuable, as your broadcast rights chart showed. And it's the most national, and frankly, at this point, growing internationally. So the big broadcasters, whether they're streaming, Netflix, Amazon, and so forth, they can't do without the NFL.
And on that note, I've never really heard of NFL teams being compared to, like buying treasury bonds, throwing off cash on a consistent basis, like flying a 747 on autopilot. I suppose you need to know where that billionaire's cafeteria is that you mentioned, Ken.
Yeah.
Look, it's been just an incredible session today. You have provided us with a very, very unique peek behind the curtain of how the NFL has achieved its superpower status today as America's favorite sport, as well as some of those Texas-sized egos involved. That was an incredible session today. Thank you both, and thank you all for joining us. This brings us to the end of today's session. Please do reach out to us with any further questions that you may have relating to the presentation that was shared. And the easiest way to do that is to reply to the email that we'll send out late in a little bit. And for those of us watching this on YouTube, please do follow us so we get notified when we go live next. And remember, there is only one book to get if you are interested in the business of the NFL League, and that is Ken Belson's Every Day is Sunday. Grab your copy today. Thank you all very much, and see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys.